Okay, here's an overview of the blender. In this case, we're going to take a GameCube racing wheel and we're going to allow it to be used on the Atari Spy Hunter. So we're taking an analog controller, we're going to convert it to digital outputs, and we're going to see what we can do to make the game playable in a very different way. So what you're looking at here is an overview of what the racing wheel looks like. It does have a gas pedal and a brake pedal, side triggers, the buttons, and the steering wheel. Both of the buttons are usable, A and B. We'll get into that a little bit in a bit. And you can see that we're using the wheel to steer, and you can see that we're using the foot brakes. Now let's have a look at Blender. Okay, first let's go ahead and have a look at the way that the OS sees the controls. For the racing wheel, we're using the GameCube Logitech racing wheel. The x-axis here is the steering wheel position. We have triggers on either side of the wheel, which go to the Z rotation and axis. We have the gas pedal, which is Y plus, and then Y negative is your brake pedal, and then of course the buttons. So inside of Blender, you see that same image. So that way you know all the inputs are where they come from and where you want them to go. On the left, it's the input, and then in the drop-down box is where you want them to go. So this mirrors the board, so when you plug the controls in, it looks the same way. You get the two inputs on the left, the outputs on the right, and the main outputs on the bottom end, same as the device. So let's, up here in the drop-downs where you select your preset that you can make or use. So let's go ahead and load that Atari one. When you load that preset, it fills in all the information in the boxes. So what we're doing here, I'm going to step through this. The x-axis comes in up on the top here and goes to the POV east. And then you have these configuration boxes. The bottom one basically says look for a change. If you see any change, then do perform the action. And the top one says at what point do I perform that action. So this config is basically saying at any action that's changed, but we're going to assume that you're trying to go right. If we go ahead and flip to the secondary mapping, it's basically just that. There are secondary options for each. So now we're actually looking at that exact same axis, the X again, and this time we're using the invert. So in other words, if it goes down instead of going up, trigger on change, and anything over 0, since it's inverted, it would calculate that for you. So it knows that any change going left, you go west. So it's just going to press the D-pad button. Now another way to do this would have been to say, if the analog value is greater than some point, then hold down the D-pad button. But if you did that, in our case, the car in the game would just fly off the edge of the screen, so it would register that you were holding it down constantly. That wouldn't be ideal. So we wanted to do it based on changes and presses, and that does present a challenge that we'll go over soon. All right, let's go back. As for the X rotation, that's going to be your gas pedal. So again, the same logic, but in this case, we just went ahead and did 150. That way, it's not going to press the gas pedal if you're not pressing it, and it waits for it to go about 50% or more, and then it registers that as an up. Same for the down, but as you remember looking at the analog display window, it was inverted, so we inverted ours here. We're not using the bottom one because we're not looking for a change, we're just looking for a value to act upon. So there's your gas and your brake. That's how that works. Over on this one, this is very simple because it's standard. Button 1 goes to button 1. That's your action button. Now to get that other button, the Spy Hunter game looks at the second controller. So what we did here is we looked at the second button being pressed, and we sent it to the second controller, button 1. That's what this 101 is, output number 2, button 1. So that's how you get your smoke screen and stuff like that. Now back to that problem that I brought up a minute ago. You'll notice that there is a Z rotation, it says block, and as the axis it says block. The reason for that is when you press these triggers on the side of the wheel, it'll ignore all of your output commands. So if you hold that down, you won't be able to control the game. The point of that is to recenter the wheel. And if you look closely at the video where we're driving the car, you'll notice that the wheel keeps getting reset because there's no way that you can possibly communicate with a game back and forth. The game only receives the input, so it couldn't possibly know the location of your steering wheel. And you'll get into a scenario pretty quickly where your wheel is cocked all the way to the right or the left and you can't turn any further. So by using these triggers, you can keep recentering the wheel and allow it to work a little more pleasing so that you can play the game. So that's a basic rundown of how we set this one up. As you can see, there's quite a bit of advanced options that can be configured in here. We haven't touched on very many of them, just some specific ones. There are all kinds of controls on this screen that we can get into in other videos. If you wanted to make a change, of course, you can make a change and then hit the save, and you can give it your own name, and then you'll have your own profile. This is just one of the preset ones that come with it. That concludes our Blender video. Thanks for watching.